everyone. I hope you're having a great Container Days 2022 so far. My name is Ramiro Berrelleza. I am the founder and maintainer of Octeto, an open source project that lets you deploy cloud native dev environments with one click. And today, I'm here to talk about how you can speed up the development of your cloud native applications with remote dev environments. So before we talk about dev environments and how they're changing the way we build cloud native applications, let's look at where we are today. As if you've been in the DevOps or cloud native world for a while, you'll agree with me that containers change the game. They were introduced about 7-8 years ago by the great team at Docker, and they really changed the way we build applications. They gave us a manifest where you can describe what the components of your application are, something you could put on your repo. And then as other technologies emerged, most notably Kubernetes, it made it even easier for us to deploy large-scale applications. So containers really made it easy to scale applications. It made us realize that instead of having these big monoliths, it made a lot more sense to have small applications with small pieces, aka microservices. And microservices gave us a lot of good things. It made the need for observability obvious. It made us realize that deploying often made a lot of sense. But one of the things that they were not great at is development. Like the dev story with microservices became harder, right? We got to a point where you had production, you had a great story around production, whether this was GitHubs, progressive rollouts, any of those things. But the dev story was still not great. And, we developers, we hack things. When we find something doesn't work, we don't sit around moping around saying, it doesn't work. What do I do with my life? No, we are hackers. We try to fix things. And the challenge that we had was that as we adopted Kubernetes, which was fantastic for production, the gap between dev and production started to widen, right? You had this fantastic orchestration technology on your production deployment, on your cloud providers, but your local experience was lacking. You either have to run everything locally and ignore your orchestration, or try to do things like, Minikube, Kind, Docker Desktop, K3s, which, while very useful, they look nothing like production. So some of us saw this and realized, hey, this is a big problem. So let's find a solution. And our first idea was, why don't we take our existing CI and staging environments and we use them for development? And this is even today what most people do, right? You write some code, you commit, you push, and then you wait for CI to deploy an environment or to run some tests and tell you, hey, your code works. But again, this is not great. This gives you a certain high fidelity. It is better than the fidelity you get from running K3s, Kind, Minikube. But now you're paying by having a very slow developer loop. And this is the worst, right? Because when you're writing code, you don't want to have to think about it. You want to write code and see the results fast. So this is what most people think of when they think of cloud native development. When you're building cloud native applications, you have to either have a local environment that looks nothing like production, but it's fast, or you have a slow cycle where your test environment looks like production, but it takes a long time. And as we've been in Octeto, I've talked to hundreds of companies, and you see companies where this loop might take an hour, 45 minutes, which if I'm writing code, that is like way too much. And this is what made us, we were thinking about, when I was building this cloud native applications and I was talking to my peers, a lot of us kind of reach the same conclusion saying, hey, if we're building applications for the cloud, if our services are meant to run in the cloud at cloud scale, why aren't our dev environments in the cloud as well? And this question is what led me and a group of my peers to kind of start thinking with and eventually creating Octeto, our open source project meant to solve this. And the solution for this is remote dev environments. The main idea behind remote dev environments is that you should not be running anything locally. All the development should happen on the cloud. And I'm not talking about the IDE. I'm not talking about replacing your terminal. These things are far too personal for us to have an opinion on. I'm talking about everything else. When you have an application with 3, 4, 5 microservices, why are you running those locally? So the idea behind remote dev environments is that your application is no longer running locally. It's going to run on this remote dev environment. This remote environment is going to be on the same infra that you're using in live production. In our case, for Octeto, this is Kubernetes. Our goal is that you're going to write code locally. You're going to have the fast inner loop of traditional local dev environments where you're writing code and you're seeing the results. But now you're going to see these results not on your local machine, but on Kubernetes with the same configuration that your cloud native applications have. And what's key for me, and when I started working on Octeto, this was like fundamental for us, was we want it to be fast. We want you to have a fast inner loop. I don't want you to have to write code, wait for the image to be built, then push it, then redeploy. That is not a great inner loop. But also, we don't want every single developer to have to be expert on every element of your stack. If you have an application with multiple microservices, what I want you to be able to do is deploy one command and then develop on whatever service you care. And then finally, we want to enable developers to access the power of the cloud. You should not be constrained by how much you can run on your local machine, because sure, some of us might be able to have the latest and greatest, M2 device from Apple. But the reality is that it shouldn't matter, right? It's all meant to run in the cloud. We have elastic scale there. We have quote unquote unlimited resources. So why don't we take advantage of that and run our dev workloads there? Well, that is what remote dev environments are about. That is what open source projects like Octeto enable you to do today. So I'm going to show you real quick how that looks like. So for this demo, I'm going to use Octeto. Octeto, as I was saying earlier, is an open source project. Please check it out, github.com/Octeto/Octeto. And it's a CLI that you can install on any OS, Linux, Windows, Mac, ARM, AMD, your choice. And it allows you to deploy with one command your remote dev environment on any Kubernetes cluster. And this can be anything. This can be a local cluster, which I don't recommend, but if you want to, you can do it. Or any remote cluster, Civo, Google Cloud, Azure, DigitalOcean, your own homebrewed cluster with kubeadmin. It's really up to you. Octeto will allow you to do any of them. So today, I'm going to show you how you can use the Octeto CLI and one of our sample applications to develop cloud-native applications directly in your cluster. And it's not just about development. What I'm going to show you today is how you can set up a really fast workflow so you can be super efficient while still building this amazing cloud-native experiences. So, enough slides. I'm going to switch now. I'm going to show you on VS Code what does it look like when you're building an application in the cloud using the Octeto CLI. So for today, I'm going to use our movies application as the demo. I really like this application because it showcases what your typical cloud native application looks like. Here you can see a diagram of what it looks like. This is an application that lets you rent movies from an online site. It has a front end coded in React. It has a rent service, an API service, a catalog, all of them on Express. It has a worker on Go, and it has Kafka, PostgreSQL, and MongoDB. And I really like to use this example because I feel like this will give us great visibility into what dev environments look like, why you should use them, and how you can build a fantastic dev experience for you and your team using the Octeto CLI. Everything I'm showing today is open source, and it can be run on any Kubernetes cluster. All you need to do is go to GitHub/Octeto, start a repo, and then download the CLI, and you will be ready to go. I'm running this on VS Code, but just to be clear, our remote dev environments with Octeto work with any IDE, any stack, and any Kubernetes cluster. It's one of the amazing things about having remote dev environments using containers. It really runs anywhere. So let's start by opening a terminal and deploying our dev environment. The first thing you do is Octeto is the CLI, and there's a command called deploy. I'm going to press enter to deploy the application, and while this runs, I'm going to show you why or how this works. So in the case of Octeto, everything is based off this file called Octeto YAML. You can think of this as your dev environment as code. Here, you're going to specify 3 steps of the creation and management of your dev environment. There's a build phase where you're going to tell Octeto how you're building your images. In this case, we're building every image using our local Docker build. You're going to tell Octeto how do you deploy your dev environment. In this case, we're using Helm, which is the standard for cloud native applications. And as you can see, we're doing multiple installs. We're installing Postgres, Kafka, Mongo. Then we're building our front end, our catalog, all of those things step by step using our existing manifests. And this is something key of remote dev environments. One of the goals of remote dev environments is that you don't want to have to create specific manifest or dev-only manifest, because every time you have a dev-only configuration, image, or manifest, you're creating some skewing from dev to prod. So one of the advantages of Octeto is that you can reuse the same manifest. And this is something that as more and more people adopt Octeto, and even like teams and companies, a lot of these users are now reaping the benefits of having the same configuration in production, staging, and dev. And for me, that is the magic of dev environments. Is I have a production-like environment where I can try my code, see changes, make sure everything works end-to-end, right at my fingertips. So we talk about build, we talk about deploy, and then finally, we can talk about dev. And dev is where you tell Octeto, hey, when I'm developing this service, these are the changes I want you to make. Because even though we want to have realistic dev environments, there are certain things that only happen in production. For Octeto, the more important one is that you want to synchronize your code. You want to be able to have a code change happen locally and then be reflected on your dev environment. In this case, we're telling Octeto that, hey, any change that happens on the front-end folder will be synchronized here. And the other thing is you want to be able to change the start command. With Octeto, you have an option of opening a terminal. In this case, I'm telling Octeto when I am developing, I want a bash command so I can run every command I want. Or you can tell Octeto, hey, run my start command, which in this case is yarn start. So we have build, deploy, and dev. That is all we need to interact with our dev environment. So let's go back to my terminal. By now, the deployment finished. You can see here that I have all the logs for all the deployment steps that I showed you before. And I have the endpoints of my application. In this case, I'm using an ingress. I have a host I pre-created, a load balancer, and DNS entries, which means that I can now click on this and go to my dev environment. In this case, the application I showed you before is now running here, which means that I can now try this end to end. I can go to the application and let's say, click the run button. And you see now I'm exercising all the paths. Everything I showed you before on that architectural design diagram is now happening here. I'm exercising my React frontend, my Express API, my worker in Go, Kafka queues, Postgres, Mongo for the catalog, the works. And that is one of the most, for me, one of the coolest things about dev environments, which is I can try my application end to end. I know that it works. I know that if I make a change, it's going to work everywhere. So first step, I deployed. I now can see this end to end. I could send this link to anybody else in my team, anybody I'm working with, and they could see this the same way I'm doing because this application, this dev environment is running on Kubernetes. But not yet, because before I share this, let's make some development. So imagine that we have this movie app, very successful. People are renting movies left and right because, if vinyl made it back, maybe DVDs will make it back too. Who knows? Anyway, because it's Container Days, we want to have a special promotion for everybody who's attending this conference. And we're going to give everybody at Containers Day a 50% off of all movies they're renting. You see this, that the movie cost me $5, which it might be a bit expensive. So I want to implement 50% off. So now let me show you how that looks like when you have a remote dev environment. So let's go back to source code and back to my terminal. I'm going to clear this so we can see the logs. And typically, you would have to make some changes, build your container image, push them to a registry, redeploy your application, and then you would figure out, hey, are my changes working or not? But that's not ideal. That's way too many steps. So instead of that, we're going to run this command called Octeto up. Octeto up will analyze this manifest I showed you before, and it's going to ask me, hey, which service you want to work at? So let's move my image here because I'm getting in the way. And in this case, I'm going to pick the front end. Let's start there. I want to have a nice visual reminder that we have this special promotion. So I'm going to tell Octeto, hey, I'm developing on the front end. Now Octeto is going to go there and it's going to apply every override that we define here in dev for the front end, which in this case means a new image because I want an image that has all my toolkit, in this case, React, Node modules, and other dependencies. It's going to give me a bash into this remote container, and it's going to synchronize my code from the front-end folder into this other folder. So if I go back here, you see that Octeto up finished. And now I have a bash into this remote container that's running on Kubernetes. If I echo my name, if let's say I dump the environment and I grep for Q, you'll see certain things there because this container is running on Kubernetes. And this is another of the benefits of using remote dev environments. You are in Kubernetes, you have the same configuration that your Helm chart has for production, which means same identity, same network rules, same dependencies, the same way of accessing secrets, all those things. But I can run my own commands and I'm synchronizing my code, which means that every change I made on my IDE will be reflected here. So first, just to show you, I'm going to run yarn start. This is the command that I have to start Webpack in dev mode, which means that it's going to hot reload my changes and it's going to give me extra logs when I access this. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to refresh my UI. And you're going to see that it shows that it's in development. This is some code I added to detect that, hey, you are in a remote dev environment. show me a UI element just so that I know that we are on development. But everything as the application looks the same. So let's open my file. I'm going to go to frontend, source, here. And in this case, I cheated. I have the code already. This is the code to show you the special promo for ContainerDays 2022. So I'm just going to uncomment. But imagine that you're writing this code. I'm going to save my file. And as soon as I save this file, Octeto will synchronize that changes into my remote dev environment, into this container that is running on Kubernetes. Webpack is going to pick up that change. It's going to rebuild my assets. And voila, the change was already applied. I can see my changes here. I have this nice banner that says that, hey, for any ContainerDays attendees, we have a 50% discount on all movies today. This is great. I have my front-end change implemented. So let's try it out. Let's see. Cloud Atlas, $3.99. I'm going to rent this movie. But surprise, the discount was not implemented. Why? Well, because I just made this change on the front end. But of course, this is a microservice-based application. The logic for pricing might not be on the front end, right? And because I have this environment that works end-to-end with all my services are running, I know this. I don't have to wait until CI. I didn't have to build an image. I didn't have to redeploy it. It was all here. So let's fix it, right? This is a change that I have to do on the worker. So if you remember from our diagram, kind of going back here, let's open it up again. We made a change in the front end, but the front end talks to the rent service that puts things in Kafka, and worker is the one that's actually doing the processing of the rental and putting it in Postgres. So why don't we try and make some changes on the worker service? So I'm going to open another terminal. And this is also something really cool about Octeto, is how it allows you to develop in as many services as you want at the same time. We're going to do Octeto up again, but now instead of front end, I'm going to pick the worker. Same process as before, different service, which in this case means also a different stack. Frontend is React with Webpack. Worker is Go and is using just like a very simple application, no framework. So I'm here. I'm on a different container. You can see here by the name of it. This is called Worker. The one before, if we go back, was called Frontend. And here, I can have access to every tool, right? All my source code is here. In this case, it's a Go-based application, which means that make is the best way to interact with it. So I can do make build. And this is an example of how Octeto and remote dev environments help you to be more efficient. I have one service with React. I have another service with Go. I didn't have to install anything locally. I ran Octeto deploy and everything is there. So in this case, let's open this main file. And again, I cheated. I'm going to write some code here to apply this 50% discount. This is going to simply get the message from Kafka. This very standard code is from Kafka, is getting the message. And it's going to apply a 50% discount. And then it's going to insert that into database. So I'm going to save my file. In this case, I'm going to build the binary. This is directly on my dev container with the right version, all my toolkit, everything else. And then in this case, I'm going to run make a start, which is just going to start the binary. I'm using the same tooling I'm used to, my favorite IDE, but now I'm making all these changes. So let's see if it works. I'm going to go back to my dev environment. See this number, 899. I'm going to refresh this. In this case, the application is built to always reprocess the messages. And you can see that now my discount is applied. MobiDoc, $12.99. Rent, $6.49, because the discount was applied. And again, this is the beauty of remote dev environments. One command, deploy the dev environment. I have all my services running end to end. open my IDE, start writing code, synchronize my changes, see the results immediately. I don't have to commit, I don't have to push, I don't have to redeploy. And if you notice, I don't even have to run Qf commands if I don't want to. This is built in a way that is abstracted for you. Your manifest is there. Whoever writes this Octail YAML to describe your dev environment is creating this configuration. But for everybody else in your team, Octeto deploy, Octeto up is all you need to do. But that's not all. This experience is like local. I'm running with my favorite IDE. I'm using make, I'm using yarn start. And I could even do things like use a debugger. So in this case, let's make sure that our Go code is working. So instead of make start, I'm going to run make debug. This dev environment already has Delve pre-installed, which is, for those of you who might not be Go developers, the debugger for Go. I have Delve pre-installed. I already configured Octeto to talk to this remote debugger, which means that I can connect my local debugger to this and debug my changes directly on Kubernetes from my local machine. So we're going to go to main. In this case, we're going to have a breakpoint here to make sure that we're calculating the right price, the right discount. You can see here that Delve already started. And just like every day, I'm going to go to VS Code, use my traditional debugging configuration, click on debug, and you see now that it's starting to happen. And as soon as the message was processed, debugger broke. I can see here that the value of price is $4.99. I'm applying this discount. And you can see that the value now is 2.495. I could go to the debugger, inspect all my variables. When I'm done, I continue to run. I disconnect from the debugger. Whatever I want, my application keeps running, my code is validated, and I know that it works end to end. And this is a small, quasi-trivial change, but I hope this can show you how remote dev environments do make it easier for you to build cloud-native applications. It allows you to abstract Kubernetes. It allows you to get the same experience that you had locally, but while leveraging the power of the cloud and the power of Kubernetes. And this example is simple. You have 5 services, but we have people in our community in Octeto running dev environments with 30, 50, even close to 100 microservices at a time, because Kubernetes is really good at running workloads at high scale. That is why we use Kubernetes. But when you add Kubernetes and Octeto together, it becomes a fantastic platform for your remote dev environments. So just to finalize, I wanted to quickly reiterate on why I believe that remote dev environments are fantastic for building cloud-native applications. Number one, you're no longer running on your local machine. As we saw in the demo, everything is running in Kubernetes, where all the dependencies are pre-installed, where my code is synchronized, where I can have the right debugger pre-installed, the right version of React, all of those things. I'm getting real feedback. I'm running this the same way that it's meant to run in production, with a network, the same security, the same identity, the same end-to-end validations. So I get that, but I'm still writing code locally. I'm using VS Code, which is my favorite code editor. I'm using a local debugger. I'm writing code locally. And Octeto is making sure that all those changes are reflected on this remote dev environment without having to commit, build, push, deploy, or wait forever for the CI pipeline to finish. Also, I don't have to worry about running configurations, reading manifests. As you saw, Octeto deploy, Octeto up, and everything is up and running. I don't have to be an expert in Kubernetes. As long as somebody in my team built this remote dev environment configuration for me, I can leverage all that effort, be effective, make sure that my application behaves as we want it to be, without having to get into the specifics of how do I build a container, where do I get the database from, where do I get my data from. All of those things are fully automated for you. And finally, I'm saving resources because everything is running on the cloud. I can deploy the environment, work on it, and when I'm done, destroy it. And I'm only paying for the resources I'm consuming. But more importantly, I'm going fast because I'm not affected by having a slow machine. Or maybe you have a Windows PC and your coworker has a Linux machine and somebody has a Mac. It doesn't matter. Remote dev environments are universal. They're on Kubernetes. They're replicable. They are ephemeral, and everybody benefits from them. And that is really what I want you to, walk away from this as you go see other talks. Containers are fantastic. They made our lives so much easier when it came to production applications, reliable deployments, immutable infrastructure. And now it's time to also use them for development. Tools like Octeto and the concept of remote dev environments allow us to benefit from containers, also from development. And the same things that I talked about in production are things we need in development. Reliable deployments, ephemeral dev environments, immutable, everything that we use in production, we can also benefit from as development. So enjoy the conference, but as you go through other talks, as you get back home, do think about how can you give yourself and your team a great dev experience, and think about how, whether it's Octeto or many other tools out there that help you with remote dev environments, think about how these tools can make your life easier. How can they make you go faster? Because when you're faster, you're shipping more value. Your customers, your users, your co-maintainers are going to be more productive, and we all benefit from this. I hope you find this talk useful. My name is Ramiro. You can find my contact information on the ContainerDays page. I'm very active on Twitter. I love talking about developer experience and remote dev environments. So if this is a topic that you're interested in, if you like this talk or if you didn't, please reach out to me. I'm going to be here for the QA session, but I'm also on Twitter. So please reach out. I would love to continue this conversation after the conference is over. But until then, enjoy ContainerDays 2022. I wish I could be there with you, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
How are you doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
Thank you very much for this talk. It was very interesting. So it's time to get into the QA session. Actually, we have quite a few questions. So the first one is, should every developer have their own dev environment?
That's a great question to start with. And thank you, everybody. Great questions. If we don't get through them all, please reach out on Twitter, email at Ramiro@Octeto, and happy to continue the conversation. So should every developer get their own dev cluster? No, I don't think so. One of the things that we did when we started building Octeto was that we wanted to make it so that multiple developers can share the same cluster. So what we believe is kind of like the right level is namespace per developer on the same dev cluster. Of course, this also depends on what kind of applications you're building. If you're building something that requires access to the entire cluster, different story. But for most applications, we believe that a single namespace on a shared dev cluster is good enough. Octeto has a lot of mechanisms built in to make this easier for you, like namespace per developer, certain policies to prevent you from overriding other developers' namespaces, and things like that.
Thank you very much. We also have like a few questions, so I'll try to sum them up into a single one. How does Octeto compares to Scaffold, Tilt, Compose V2, for example? What's for you the main differences?
Right, that's really cool, because I love that there's so many open source projects and products now attacking this problem. We're all trying to attack the same problem around how to make it easier for developers to build cloud native applications. Every tool has a different approach. Scaffold is focused on automating the build and redeploy part of the workflow. Tilt is more focused on kind of giving you visibility of multiple services. Compose V2 is focused on giving you the definition of your application. Octeto is focused on giving you a faster inner loop where everything is running on your cluster. That's what you'll see, that we're very focused on having a build service in the cluster, of having code synchronization, and being able to override only certain parts of your cloud native application. Our goal, our focus is really to help you move your development, move your inner workflow into the cluster. And like what I said, everybody on the stocks is it's good to see all the tools and make sure you pick the one that's the best fit for you. They're all great tools. We're all focusing on different pieces of the broader challenge, which is how do we make applications on Kubernetes easier to build and develop.
Okay, another one saying, are there naming or any other conflicts where multiple developers use Octeto within the same cluster for the same project?
As long as you follow certain best practices, and one of them is going to give every developer your namespace, you should be okay. We have in the community teams of hundreds of people using Octeto on the same cluster without any of these issues. You do have to make sure that, you have certain policies in place, that every developer is using their own context, things like this. If you have every developer publishing their dev environments into the same namespace, you might run into naming issues, but as long as you keep the namespace per developer abstraction, you will be fine. And this is what we recommend all of our users in the community. And as I was saying earlier, we have teams with like 50, 100. I think the biggest team I've seen has around almost 200 developers on the same cluster, actively developing using Octeto, and they haven't run into any of these issues. So it scales. This model scales fairly well. Again, as long as your application is namespace aware. That is one of the key things.
Okay, thank you. Another one says, doesn't defining the deployment process in Octeto creates an additional danger of drift between dev and prods?
That is a great question. And if you look at the manifest where you define Octeto, one of the big things we do is we're pushing everybody to reuse the same configuration scripts, installation scripts, manifests that you do in production. Our goal is that the deployment part of the Octeto manifest is just a copy of whatever you're deploying in production. This could be Helm upgrade or calling a shell script, any of these options, because you are right. If you start to create something specific just for Octeto, you're going to see drift. And our goal is the other direction, is reuse the same configuration scripts, reuse the same manifests, and then just use Octeto to apply any overrides that you might need for development. If you need to change an image, if you need to inject certain secrets, if you want to change some environment variables, do that at the Octeto level, but try to keep everything else about your application as close as is practical to production to reduce this drift that you are talking about.
Awesome. We have a lot of questions, but let's get only a few of them. Does Octail work with secured containers without bash or without running as root? I don't know if...
Yes, it is possible. File synchronization might not work, and that's something you'll need to disable. But you can still deploy, you can still connect your remote debugger and things like that. That is, as you define your development experience, those are some of the trade-offs that you need to decide how close you want it to be to production. If you want to use secure containers, if you want to have read-only containers with no shell running, then you might not be able to do things like open a terminal or connect the file synchronization service. So it's really up to you. Octeto is built kind of on a way that you can enable, disable all these features so that you can control what your dev experience is like. However, it is true that if you will require root, but file synchronization is a bit part of our experience. So if you don't have a read-write file system on the container, your experience is not going to be as nice. These are things, by the way, that Octeto will overwrite for you, so you don't have to include them on your production image. These will be things that only happen when you run Octeto up, which is when Octeto swaps your production image with an image that has all these overrides that you define on your manifest.
Awesome. A question that got quite interest is, how do you develop using Octeto if the internet connection is broken?
Great question. So 2 things here. One of the reasons why we made Octeto function in this kind of file sync mode is that you always have your code locally and you always have your IDE. If your connection is intermittent, you might have issues where you have to reconnect. If your connection is completely broken, you are not going to be able to sync your code to Octeto, but everything will be still local. So it could be, you write your code locally, you try things, and as soon as your connection is established, you run Octeto up, Octeto will reconnect real fast, and it will start synchronizing back. But it is true that if you want a fully disconnected, no internet kind of experience, then Octeto is not going to be as useful to you as having everything run locally. Our goal with Octeto, though, is kind of help those teams where their applications might be too big to run locally, or where they're already depending on other cloud services, where this question of fully disconnected versus connected is no longer an issue. But it supports that mode where you can just synchronize when you're back online.
Okay, last two questions. A fun one, actually. Where does the name Octeto come from?
That is a great question. It's kind of a random name, but I started Octeto with two really good friends. We're all from Spanish-speaking countries. So when we were looking for a name, we realized that Octeto, not with the same spelling, without the K, is the Spanish version of byte. So byte in Spanish in the olden days was called Octeto. So it sounded like a fun name. No other project had that name, so we just decided to put a K to signal that this was a Kubernetes-focused project, and then put it out there. It was a bit of a homage to the fact that when we all went to school, all of our college textbooks were translated to Spanish, sometimes quite literally, and Octeto came from there. So easy to spell, short word, and a nice homage to our Spanish-speaking heritage.
Okay, and the last one, the very last one. Instructing Octeto to replace production by dev images for having build tools and hot reloading breaks the initial promise. Is there any way around it?
Yes, there is a way around it. The image replacement part of Octeto is completely optional. Some of our users, especially in the Java world, will simply synchronize their .class or their .jar files instead of doing a full image replacement to get closer to production. So it is possible. Like I was saying before, our goal here is to give you the building blocks for you to build your own developer experience. For some of our users, they would rather have something that is easier for development, but similar, but not quite close to production. Others will want a more high fidelity production view where it's the same image. They're not injecting build tools. And in that case, you have to do the build process elsewhere. And it's really up to you to pick your level of risk, your level of how much complexity you want, which can go from injecting that image, hot synchronization, and hot reloading, all the way to using the same image that in production, and I'm just updating my dev environment whenever I push my code. They're all valid. It really depends on the kind of application you're building and the kind of experience you want to build for your team. But again, our goal with Octeto is to give you the building blocks for any of these scenarios, and that is something that you can find in our docs and our blogs how to do.
Thank you so much. Thank you for answering all those questions. Thank you so much for the talk. It was very interesting. I think he deserves a big round of applause, please.